Folks, I think we just will make a start. It's 7:32 here by my watch, and we have a good few people online. I suppose just by introduction, my name is Peter Mccann, and I'm the chair of the Northern Ireland Institute of Agricultural Science. My day job, I'm the Northern correspondent with the Irish Farmers Journal, a farming newspaper based in Dublin, but I work in the Northern team. I'm also a farmer, a sheep and suckler farmer here in Limavady in North County Derry. So from the registrations, we see that there's actually been quite a lot of interest for this event. This is our first go at a webinar. Quite a few non-members of NIIAS, and we're very pleased to have you all with us this evening. So just for background, NIIAS is a 270-member professional organisation for people that are working in the agri-food industry in Northern Ireland. We have a fairly wide base of people from civil servants, researchers, scientists, bankers, agricultural journalists like myself, farmers. There's a wide range of people that work from both the public sector and the government and the private sector. We tend to hold several networking events each year about topics that affect people that work in industry, and also just, I suppose, the latest science and the latest thinking about things that influence agriculture both locally in Northern Ireland and internationally. Just as well, for the NIIAS members that are online this evening, we're having a conference planned, I think, for the 19th of March or so, which of course turned out to be a very turbulent time with coronavirus. So we had to just postpone that really at the last few days before it. So we're hoping we can maybe hold that event in a physical form at some point. We had the Minister for Agriculture, Evan Poots, to speak, and Nigel Scollin from Queen's University, and also Dr. John Gilliland from Devon's Nutrition. So we're hoping to hold that event at some point in the near future in a physical form, but if not, we'll probably move online like so many other organisations and events, and hold a webinar type event like this. Folks, that's really enough from me by introduction. We have more people online, so just for anyone that's come on recently, I'm the chair of this evening's event, Peter Mccann, and I'm going to hand over to our first speaker. So we're talking about vertical farming this evening. I'll tell you, with all this rain that's been this last few days, indoor agriculture is definitely very appealing to me at the minute. So the first speaker is coming from Intelligent Growth Solutions, an Edinburgh-based firm. He's the chief executive, David Farquhar. I suppose what brought this firm to my attention to start is they've been in the news recently because Intelligent Growth Solutions is planning Scotland's first commercial vertical farm, and it's a series of 9-metre high columns that will produce up to 70 tonnes of food each year. So if everything's going okay, David, I can hand over to you if everyone can see you there and hear you.
There we are. Can you see my screen?
Looks good to me, David. Yep.
Great stuff. So, as noted, my name's David Farquhar. I'm CEO of IGS. I'm going to walk you through a little bit of the history of the business, but then focus very heavily on what we do to perfect crop production using artificial intelligence, machine learning, IoT, various different new technologies, and then talk about how we manage that and our relationship with the market. So about 15 minutes or so. Are we moving? Okay, all right. So we were roughly a 7-year-old business. We've now actually invested, by the end of this year, we will have invested almost £10 million in R&D. We have a whole bunch of patents around different systems within our overall vertical farm machine. But we've taken the approach to entirely productize this, which means it will basically work out of the box and generate cash from the moment that it's built. We have the 3 most active VCs in global agri-tech. We have Osprey Ag Science from New York. We have S2G Ventures, Seed to Growth from Chicago, and we have Ag Funder from Silicon Valley. people talk about CEA, but we talk about total control environment agriculture, and hopefully my talk will explain why we use that phrase. Every single node, every sensor, camera, light, whatever, has an IP address, so it's on the internet, so the whole thing is completely IoT enabled. And we've managed to drive down the cost of the energy consumption by 50%, and that is the biggest single cost in the system. Compared to the world's most efficient greenhouse or glass houses, we have 15 times greater yield per square meter of footprint. We have 0 emissions. We put nothing in the air, nothing in the ground, nothing in the watercourse. And we're totally biosecure because our irrigation and ventilation systems are closed loop. And we reused 95% of the water and all of the air that runs through the system. So we set ourselves 3 targets, and I call them the 3 E's. First of all, you have to have excellence in terms of the quality of your produce. And if you cannot commit to producing that, then there's really not consumers. So we build them for real farmers and real growers. And we need to make sure that they have a really great margin between their farm gate cost price. And in this country, it's not just about post-coronavirus, it's about post-Brexit. People want it to be sustainable. And agriculture at the moment is the single most polluting industry on the planet because it was transport, but of course, hardly any of the planes are flying. So agriculture creates many of its own problems in making it challenging to grow food. And so we need to look at alternative ways of solving that. So what we need to think about is the weather. I was with a farmer in Farquhar on the north coast of Scotland, well, the coast between Aberdeen and Inverness last week. He's a multi-dimensional farmer, but we were focused on the 100 acres of beetroot that he has because he's the main Scottish supplier to Baxter's of Speyside. And he was talking about, just being at the behest of the weather the whole time. You really don't know what you're going to get from one week to the next and how that's going to impact your crop. He breaks even at about 14 tons per acre. His best year ever is 19 tons, but the last 2 years have delivered him 7. So that's, it's a really kind of tough place to be. And I live in a farming community in Stirlingshire, just off the Highlands in Scotland. And I know a lot of my friends really struggle all the time. So what if you are now in charge of the weather completely? So let's think about the weather as the sun, the wind, and the rain. Another factor to consider here is that each one of these is multi-dimensional. So or multifactorial. So the sun, the rain, and the wind each have about 9 different factors. And if you imagine something like the spectrum of the light that comes from the sun, it could be almost any combination. It could be almost anything in a spectrum from blue through red to green and so on. And so the number of possible variables and the number of possible values that go to make up the weather are massive in number, and therefore it requires really big mathematics and therefore artificial intelligence using computing to calculate optimal weather recipes. It's just as big as trying to predict the weather, which is obviously what people like the Met Office are doing for us. We think about the sun. Inside our farm, it's illumination. So here you can see a stack of growth trays. On the top of the trays, we grow the crops. On the bottom, we make 2/3 of the weather. We make the sun and the wind. And so underneath these trays, which are 4 by 1.5 meters, so 6 square meters, just about the size of a professional snooker table, underneath each one, there are 21 rows of LED lights in each cluster, and in each cluster there are 5 different lights: red, green, blue, white, and far red. And these lights, that combination of lights allows us to make any brightness, any spectrum at all. And we can also, as well as being multispectral rather than just white, we can make things like ambient light and so on, because if you're not, don't have the level of control we've got, you're either switching your lights on or off. Photon optimization is really important. The crops tell us. And our LEDs are completely bare. We can vary the angle of the beam and make it up to 150 degrees wide, which means we spread the light very, very evenly over the crop, which means we get a very consistent growth in the crop. And in terms of creating sunrises and sunsets, the ability to dim and do pulse width modulation comes due to one of the major patterns we've got, which I'll describe later. When we get onto the ventilation, our near field ventilation is actually located right next to these LED lights, tiny little pin bricks right next to each cluster of lights. The reason for that is the LEDs are only about 65% efficient, the other 35% being unwanted heat. So we blow cold air into the back of the tray, it goes along a series of tubes, picks up the extraneous heat from the LED lights and spreads a very, very even temperature across the tray. Now that's our foreground ventilation, and we manage that at tray level, as I'll explain in a moment. But we also have Farquhar, which is like an independent farm. We have a background HVAC system, which is managing the mix of gases. It's introducing the CO2. But it's also managing humidity. And when you put a growing, living, breathing thing transpiring all the time, like a crop, you're going to have a clash. And so managing temperature and managing humidity are two of the biggest single challenges. And the data you can see on the screen there is from about 2 weeks ago in one of our growth towers. And we are within 2%, actually it's closer to 1.5% of the targeted actual set point for the temperature and the set point for the relative humidity. And that's well within what the crop will cope with. They'll easily take up to a 10% tolerance. So we're managing that temperature, that humidity, and the mix of gases as the crops transpire. And then finally, our irrigation system, the rain. And this runs on a frame in between two stacks of the trays, the 6 metre square trays that I described to you. And so the way we do it is we run it like a hydroponic ebb and flood system. So we know exactly through the cloud what crop is in each tray. We know how old it is to within 2 days, and therefore we know how much water it needs, what temperature, what sort of EC or nutrition, the pH that's required, and the volume of water. So we flood the bottom of each tray with just about enough water. Whatever is not taken up by the roots of the crop runs down a little gully in the middle of the tray and is captured back into the system, is cleaned, is aerated, and is put back into the water tank. Similarly, everything that is transpired out by the crop is caught in, and is cooled, it is condensed, the vapor is turned back into water, and that goes back into the storage system. And so the only water that ever leaves the system is actually inside the body of the crop itself, which equates to about 5% of the water that we have in store. And because we run about 20 cycles of crop a year, that means that we only need to replenish our water system. We can do that simply by capturing rain. But those 3 dimensions of weather are not enough. If we're really to control things, we have to go 2 dimensions further. First of all, we have to think about time. As growers, you guys will all know that what a crop needs when you first plant it and you're trying to germinate it is definitely not what it needs when you're hardening it off for harvest or for maybe planting out in a field if you're growing seedlings. They need a humid, warm environment to help seed germinate. When we're getting round towards hardening off, we want to cool things down, we want to maximize the light, and that will reduce wastage. It will give a much longer shelf life, whether it's a potted plant going into a supermarket or a cut crop or something to be planted out. So important that we know the age of the crop, we know what the crop is, and we can manage it through the life cycle in that way. Secondly, you know, as I said earlier, just switching lights on and off, white to black, is just not good enough. If things are growing in nature, they go through a diurnal cycle, so there will be ambient night light. Even when it's cloudy, there will be some level of night light. Then we have a sunrise, then we can have an 18-hour perfect day, and then a sunset. And 18 hours is about the maximum amount that most crops will tolerate. So in most parts of the world, that means we can increase the light during the day by about 50% on average across the year. And therefore we can reduce the growing time by a further. And then we have to think about the seasons. So we want to be growing, thinking about April through roughly to September. It does depend obviously on the crop year of the seasons, but condensing it into a much shorter space of time. And our 5th dimension is space. So here is a stack of trays. In the 9-metre high towers, we have 2 stacks of 25 trays, crops on the top, weather on the bottom. And each one of these is its own microclimate. So the temperature, these are 30 centimetres apart, 1 foot, and the temperature of the green tray can be 6 degrees warmer than the blue and 6 degrees cooler than the gold one above it. So that's an amazing difference that you can have, which means you can grow multiple different crops in the same environment. And also we guarantee no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius variance across the tray. On the other hand, the tower, you can see 4 9-metre high towers here. The tower is an independent farm. It has its own, and this is, each one of these has its own power supply, its own internet, its own irrigation system, its own background HVAC. So it's managed completely independently. And then we need to think about the space of the growing medium itself. You know, are we growing seed potato? Are we growing lettuce or basil? You know, so we can vary this enormously for a different range of crops. And finally, we have to think beyond weather to a climate, to a space like Tuscany in the summer, because we're going to be growing basil and baby vine tomatoes. So we need to mimic that climate, that latitude of the earth, the impact of anything like the sea or altitude. And our system can mimic all of those things. And without that control, you really cannot optimize growth for the economics and the environment and the quality. The foundation of all this is our power and control system. So this is our most fundamental patent. Every other system in the world powering LED lights uses 1 phase of power. So if you remember from your physics at school, this sine wave here is going off, on, which means that the LED lights are switched on and off 50 times a second. And that's not good for them, but also it's not good for the crop. It stresses the crop. We can't see this flicker, but the crop can, and it turns out chickens can as well if you happen to be using LED lights inside a chicken shed. But we use the 3 phases of power which balance each other out. We convert, it's very low voltage at 40 volts AC, so it's safe to touch, which means we have bare aluminium tubes carrying the electricity in our system. No risk from humidity or anything like that. And then we take the top of a DC wave, it's about 65 to 70 volts DC, and as you can see, it isn't going through zero at all, and that's what allows us to control all the aspects of the light, like the dimming, the brightness, the spectrum, in a way that no other system on the planet can possibly do. We also use this in our supplementary lighting system for polytunnels and greenhouses. So that's enabled us not just to grow the leafy greens like everybody else, but fruits like chili and strawberry, and roots like baby turnip, these radishes, and potatoes, and a whole bunch more. So that is an absolutely fundamental piece. How we manage this is, first of all, we'll create a weather recipe, apply it to the crop, measure what's happened, learn from it, and then generate a variant of it. So the artificial intelligence will make a judgment based on what actually happened to the crop and slightly change it. Apply it again in terms of the light, the wind, and the water, and then use sensors and cameras to watch how that weather impacts the crop. So we will monitor lots of different aspects of the crop, and we do it remotely. We don't put any people inside the farm at all, unless there's a bit of maintenance required. So when you see photos of people wearing hairnets and lab coats and breathing all over the crop with a clipboard in their hand, then you know that's a big mistake, because that's how you get pests and diseases inside your farm. We also use the AI and machine learning for looking at the state of the farm itself. So we look at the exceptions that happen, quantify the effects on the crop, and that allows us to then come back and create yet another more accurate weather recipe. And we just keep going through this cycle, getting better and better all the time. We supply these farms to real farmers. Our promise to the market is we will never sell a single gram of crop. That's not our job. Our job is to be a tech vendor and build farms for you. So it's a modular system that can start with 2 towers and grow to 200 towers as your business grows. So it's also scalable. It's designed to be optimized at industrial capacity, very, very large capacity. We can do lots of different things with it to suit a different type of crops. We will work with you, look at the area you've actually got and specify what you need to deliver the yield of the specific SKUs that you're looking to grow. It gets shipped. We work with the local partners to construct it. Then we provide you 24/7 support, 365 days of the year, and train you how to use it. All the engineering risk has been taken away. We've made that investment on your behalf. The thing will just work. And we have the ability to build around 400 growth towers per annum, as another export systems in various parts of the world. So very excited. Thank you for the opportunity to discuss this with you, and looking forward to answering your questions afterwards.
That's a great day, very informative. Just before we head on, if I can ask just one question, and hopefully it'll be the stupidest question here tonight. Is there any soil in the trays at all, or is it all just solution going through water? No, like, I just didn't quite get that.
Soil as such, we'll use things like coir, peat, compost, some of the new gels and things that are coming out, so synthetic materials. So we're trying all kinds of different things. And in some ways, that's almost like a sixth dimension of what you can possibly change. But we also have a floating version. So for one of our customers on the continent in Europe, we've built a floating insert because they want to have larger root balls. We deliberately have very small root balls because it's waste. They want larger root balls because they plan to do multiple harvests from each crop.
100%. Listen, we'll just keep going, and we'll come back to questions at the end. Folks, just while we have, if you have any questions from David's presentation or whilst John Paul's speaking, you can just send them through there to the Q&A tab. Hopefully you can see it there just at the bottom of the screen. So you can send them across at any time, and we'll pick them up at the end. So I'll go on now to our next speaker is John Paul Pryor. He's from a Dublin-based firm, Farmony. Farmony are currently building vertical farms across Ireland at the minute. So we're looking forward to hearing what they're at, how I suppose the economics of the vertical farming, and maybe like, what sort of potential does this technology have as a farm diversification enterprise for even ordinary commercial growers. So I'll hand over to John Paul now, if you can unmute yourself there.
So folks, welcome to Farmony. Dave, thanks for going through that. Hopefully a nice balance between the both of us. I decided to come out to our farm here in Ballycoolan, just outside Dublin. So we set up Farmony, so we're a vertical farming, controlled environment vertical farming company. We set up in late 2018. We spent the first probably 8 months just growing here in an R&D farm, cycle after cycle, trying to basically optimize the output. So here in Farmony and throughout our network of farms that we're developing throughout the country, that we feel gives the best return on investment to give you a real profitable vertical farm. So we focus on leafy greens, herbs, and microgreens. So I suppose the background to Farmony was we were looking at specifically the imports that Ireland has each year. So the country imports about 300 million euros worth of fresh produce, which is a staggering number. And we feel that a lot of that can be grown at home. So if you think with the emphasis that Dave mentioned in terms of the environment, huge emphasis now on reduction in pesticides, so all this produce is pesticide free. Huge emphasis on reducing food miles. So obviously these farms can be located in urban centres, so we can reduce the food miles. If you look at the areas where our country, the UK, also imports from, you're looking like Africa, Israel, in terms of basil, for example. And we feel that can all be grown locally, pesticide free, and as Dave mentioned as well, using just 5% of the water of traditional agriculture. So we set up here in Ballycoolan. What you're looking at here is a containerized solution, though like Dave's system, this is modular. So for example, there's a lot of mushroom houses throughout the country, up the north and down south, that are possibly been disused. A lot of it, that infrastructure came from EU funding. So there's this incredible infrastructure throughout the country, and that provides for us a really good controlled environment. So here you're looking at two 40-foot shipping containers side by side, opening up 55 square meters of growing space. And from that small amount of growing space, you've got about 5 acres of the output equivalent of 5 acres of traditional farmland. So going back to the basics of, there was a lot of science involved in what they've covered, but just giving you the absolute basics of vertical farming. So obviously, you're trying to perfect it. You know, we say that every day is a summer's day in Farmony, because essentially you're trying to pick your best day during the summer in the growing season, and you're trying to replicate that all year round. So, you know, if you're looking at a growing season from April to September, you know, here we're growing, you know, the storms that we experienced over the last few days and another one on its way in the next couple of days, this climate never changes. You're growing all year round. So in the case of, I'll talk specifically about Basil, you're growing all year round. And if you look at what the market is demanding, you know, we through the research, we interviewed chefs, we interviewed wholesalers, we interviewed producers, we interviewed end consumers. We had a consumer behavioral study in Reading University, all of which is pointing to huge demand for hyper-local, pesticide-free, all year round produce, so nutritionally rich produce. So to talk to a little bit about our modular systems. So we've partnered with Sanon Bio, who are probably the leader in LED grow lighting technology. So they've got farms across the world. One I visited was in Las Vegas, which produced all the leafy greens for the strip using these very modules here that you see. So it's a 4-layer system. So in vertical farming, obviously it's up, so 4 layers. You can go up, commonly in the States, for example, they have 6 layers. We chose 4 just from like a workflow point of view, which is critical when you're managing a vertical farm. So you have a nutrient tank, so and it's a hydroponic system. So the water flows in at the top and then flows down layer to layer. And then the plants, the produce, take the nutrients that they require. So to give you an example, I mentioned Basil. So and the labor that's involved from our point of view, and while there's automated systems, Sanon Bio have an uplift system, which is a fully automated factory farm, but it requires huge investment. So a lot of vertical farms will fail on the basis that, you know, perhaps they invest too heavily in technology, and what we're after with Farmony is a really quick return on investment. So yes, you can grow amazing crops like chilies, like peppers, you can grow tomatoes, you can grow strawberries within this system, but we focus on what we consider to be the high value crops like your herbs, like your microgreens and your brassicas. So to show you specifically Basil, so the labor involved is you seed sow initially, you germinate, and then you transplant into the module. So this is a little basil plant, if you can see, and that's just 3 days old. And then it goes to 5 days old. And then it goes to 14 days old. So you started seeing it spring up. And then you have 24 days old, which is like about a 23-gram basil plant. So we've invited, and actually I'd extend the invite to all of you. You're probably only as much as 2.5 hours away. So please feel free to book an appointment and drop down to us here in Farmony. So, but we've had some of the top chefs from Dublin out, and what their reaction is what sells. They are looking for consistency. They're looking for a wow factor, which you get from this incredibly fresh produce. So, so for you as farmers, you know, you're looking to vertical farming to perhaps supplement what you're currently doing, complement what you're currently doing, or perhaps diversify completely. So the level of investment that's required, you can start with a growing module, a 4-layer growing module, from as little as, you know, about just over £2,000 sterling. And then you would build up into a farm like Farmony, so this 17 module farm would be, you know, around just over 75,000. And that's basically, you know, I've heard it referred to as a farm in a box, which is basically a plug and play farm. So as David was pointing out, the great thing about controlled environment farming is essentially you're just producing this ideal climate for the produce. So from our experience, the issue that you'll have as a producer is actually not growing the produce. The produce grows amazingly well. It's consistent. It tastes amazing. It ticks the boxes in terms of, you know, the pesticide-free side of things and the water usage. So it's got an amazing marketing story. But the big point that I would encourage you to take away from this evening is it's a massive opportunity, but you have to be able to sell. So, you know, you have to know and have a route to market. That is critical. So to talk you through different routes to market locally would be, and this means, you know, going out and perhaps talking to your local wholesaler, talking to your local chef, talking to end consumers, and understanding what the market is in your area. So I'm just going to talk briefly again about the modules. So here you have a raft. So these are called plant sites. So each one of these would hold a basil. Through depending on your planting density, that will dictate the weight of the plant when you harvest. So as I mentioned, you're looking at for a basil plant, you're looking at about 26 days. That would be the same in terms of leafy greens, your baby green mix. And then microgreens are just 7 to 10 days. So microgreens would be like your pea shoots, your sunflower shoots, your micro coriander, all of which would be like, you know, would tick a lot of boxes for chefs. So I'm going to share a screen with you here, and we'll actually go through specifically. I've got an Excel file. So Peter, can you see, can people see my Excel file?
Yeah, it looks good to me, John Paul.
Okay. So I'll send this through to everyone because I think it's a really good working document to show basically the profitability and critically the return on investment that you would be looking at if you invest in this case, the radix system from San Bio. So here we have 17 modules in production. We've broken them down, so 7 herbs, 7 microgreens, and 3 lettuce. Your crops per year of your herbs are like 17 crops. Microgreens, which I mentioned, grow so much faster in 7 to 10 days, 46 crops per year, and 12 crops of your lettuce. In terms in your herbs, it's like, you know, nearly 2,000 kg per year, and you can see how the file works through microgreens and with lettuce. Here is your wholesale price of £10.80 per kg in terms of herbs. And down here, you can see basically your cost, including all your energy costs, all your labor costs, all your seeds and nutrients, your software costs are all covered at a per kg price of £463. So you would be growing for £463 per kilo, you would be selling for £10.80. So you can see that including labor costs, your margin in that year with this particular mix would be £37,000. So if you're, you know, you're looking at, and this is where our emphasis is, you're looking at a return on investment there within, you know, 2 to 3 years. In terms of like where we see value, having talked to wholesalers, we'd strongly recommend looking at herbs. So for example, if you have any, specifically a pesto manufacturer in your area, like this would be a godsend to them. You would be able to go direct to that pesto manufacturer with fresh all year round basil, and inevitably they're currently getting their basil, you know, imported through a wholesaler. So huge opportunities from a value point of view in your herbs, also in your microgreens, and then I would suggest some caution in terms of lettuce. You know, you only have to walk into your local Aldi or Lidl to see the price that heads of lettuce are being sold at. So you have to be wise about what you sell. So, you know, in summary on that front, I suppose it's critical that you know the numbers. It's critical that you understand the return on investment, and that you know your market. As I say, you know, controlled environment farming, vertical farming and technology has moved on so much. If you think in terms of hydroponics, some people would refer to, oh, it's like some guy growing weed in their attic, you know, under a very high powered light. So technology has come on so much here. These are like low energy LEDs. So it's so much more efficient than it once was. And it's, you know, it's an incredibly exciting space to be. As regards to your like workflows, critically important. It's so important that workflow is critical. So any of you that have experience specifically in mushroom growing, that's the kind of process driven activity that vertical farming is. You know, we grow within a, you know, with a temperature range of about 18 to 23 degrees. So it's a very pleasant working environment. You know, in terms of, just to talk as well about, we grow vertically and horizontally. You might know companies such as Freight Farms or Square Roots, who also have containerized solutions, but they grow vertically and vertically. So the plants are coming out from the wall. So we chose this solution instead of one container, which is what Square Roots would have, and Freight Farms, we have two. So there's just a really nice, more practical working environment here. So they're the key details from our side. As I say, or as was introduced, we're setting up this network of farms throughout the country. You know, covering again what David was mentioning. You know, we're essentially a technology company ourselves. Data is so critically important. So if you look out your, you know, front window tonight, you'll see, and as farmers, you're probably well aware of, you know, how challenging it is to predict, you know, the climate. Whereas in controlled environment farming, that's exactly what you can do. So if when you find the ideal growing climate that gives you your best output, well, then that's what you just replicate over and over. So when David was talking in terms of machine learning, the IoT, the Internet of Things, that's what he's referring to. So in our own system, from a software point of view, you can manage your lights remotely, you can manage your pumps locally. The essential elements, as Dave mentioned as well, is your EC and your pH, which is like that measures your nutrients in your water, and then your ambient temperature, your humidity, your water temperature, all have an impact on the success of your crop. But once you're growing crop over crop, well, then machine learning can find that optimum output. So yeah, I mean, you know, just again talking through the basics, following on from Dave's more in-depth, you know, scientific look. You know, you have this is called a growing media, so this is your plug. Dave mentioned peat, so that's what we're dealing with here. You could also grow in rock wool, but we've been like significantly more successful in this particular peat plug. You have growing mats in terms of your trays. So this is your tray of leafy greens. You can see their beautiful roots coming down into the water, and they would be grown. So you would be seed sowing on it could be a hemp fiber mat, so compostable. So yeah, I mean, like as I say, it's a really exciting opportunity. You know, we're very aware, you know, down here of you know, Ireland leads both north and south in terms of dairy and in terms of beef, is a global leader. We feel that horticulture is a poor relation, and we really feel that this could, you know, inspire a next generation of grower that's a data-focused grower. You know, we're all aware again that the average age of farmers is mid-60s at the moment. There's not that much coming through, and we feel that this is a really exciting place to be. And with dietary changes, the demand, that 300 million that I said that's coming into the country, that's only going to increase. So as I say, it's definitely worth considering. And once again, to extend that invite to drop down to Dublin to see our farm here in Ballycoolan, and we can talk you through how it works. And I'll send through this Excel file to everyone attending, and I can follow up with a phone call to talk you through the figures. But I think the most important thing is to understand the investment, to understand the return on investment, and then finally to make sure that you have a market for the produce. Because the great thing is the produce is no problem. Making sure that you have a market and a route to market is where there potentially is a challenge. And we'd be happy to try and help facilitate relationships in that regard too. All right,
That's
Peter.
great. Thank you, John Paul. Just you've talked for quite a while. Just two quick questions, just if you can, before you take a wee break. On the modules thing there, you did explain this, so I just want you to just go over it again because I didn't quite follow it. That say that Excel spreadsheet of 17 modules. So is that what you're standing in now? That's the two containers. That's what you call 17 modules. Is that right?
So the 17. So it's modular, and there's 17 of these modules. So the footprint or the size of the module of one module is 1 meter by 1.3 meters. Okay, and there's 17 modules in this particular setup.
Right.
Okay,
and that's the one that is roughly the size. That's the 5 acre one.
So there's 17 modules.
In two containers. Is that right?
Of these, and that combined gives you the output equivalent of 5 acres.
5 acres. Okay. Oh, that's right. And just on the labour one there too, I think you said that a lot of the labour requirement is actually at the beginning of the process when it comes to germination and planting.
Yeah. So you're basically, it would be you know, your germination, your seed sowing, which can be pretty quick. Your transplanting, and then your harvesting, obviously, and your cleaning. So, right. You know, there's solutions, you know, yeah, I think you have to find that balance between, you know, investing so heavily in, you know, automation, but you have to justify it. So, you know, we've looked at different harvesting solutions. You know, I mean, San Bio, for example, as I say, they're like the global leader in, you know, in growing technology. You know, you could spend 10 million and have a fully automated warehouse farm. But you have to know your market, and you have to make sure that you're really conscious of that return on investment. Because I think that's where a lot of vertical farms globally fall down. They go heavy in automation, and while certain elements of automation, for example, obviously, you know, we have automated lights, we have the water flows automated, the pumps are automated, but it has to make sense, you know. So, I mean, in a bigger farm, if you had 100 modules, for example, you'd be at a point where certainly you should consider having an automated harvester, you know, potentially an automated seed sow, and that's all available, but just you have to pick the right time to go up to that next level.
Oh, that's great, John Paul. Folks, I have a couple of questions here in the Q&A, so we'll just get to them now. If I can just go back to David, if that's okay, if he's there. Yep. David, I suppose just interested to hear your thoughts just more broadly about the future of agriculture and food production. It was at the beginning of this year, the fellow George Monbiot, the writes for The Guardian, had the Apocalypse Cow documentary, you know, that, you know, farming's finished and we'll all grow everything in labs. And just what is your thoughts on that? Or what is your thoughts on farmers like me? Is land-based food production on its way out with this technology?
Absolutely not. If you, a good example is the Singapore 30 by 30 food strategy. So we have a number of people planning farms there to support that. And the idea is that they're going to try to grow 30% of their food in Singapore by 2030. And currently they're only at 5%. But the way they've divided if you could imagine a pizza diagram, so they reckon 50% of the diet will be fruit and veg, 25% staples, and 25% protein. And they plan to grow 10 of the 25% of protein locally, which will be primarily egg production and aquaculture. And they plan to grow 20 of the 50% of which is fruit and veg locally as well. And that will be under glass or in vertical farms. So I think that, you know, this technology is going to make a contribution to global food production, but it's going to be in the region of 20 to 25% of what people consume. And the other use for vertical farms like ours is to grow a much more reliable source of seedlings. So, for example, I know that in the UK, the strawberry industry throws away 35% of all the seedlings that it imports from Europe and North Africa, and that costs the industry £12 million a year. And so if we can grow those seedlings in this country and do it much more cleanly and more environmentally efficiently, then we'll save a huge amount of money and we'll save a lot of food miles as well. So I think that this is complementary to existing farmers. It's a way of diversifying. It's a way of keeping the next generation on the land. And it's a way of producing far more efficient starter plants. And those are three really good reasons for us to be working as we are with the community. So for example, we've done very successful trials on broccoli seedlings, which are being grown in a third of the time it takes to grow under glass. And that is fairly typical of what we see.
Just at the start of your presentation, you talked about zero emissions. I'm just wondering, how is that from like the electricity usage? You know, is that part from renewables, or how are you able to say it's zero emissions?
Yeah, so we use a company called Green Energy, and they are completely fossil fuel free. So it's all solar or wind or whatever. And then we had the Scottish Environmental Protection Agency, SEPA, came and did an audit. And actually the World Wildlife Fund turned up and did the same thing. And they confirmed that we're putting nothing in the air, nothing in the water, nothing in the ground. And so it's a completely clean system.
Well, that's 100%. I just have a question there too on the chat from an attendee about does the AI learning advise and adapt the nutrition provided for the plants as well as the best weather and climate?
Yeah, so you can tune it to focus on different aspects, and that's why I say I think there's probably a sixth dimension, which is a series of sort of physical inputs. So what is the seed we're using? What is the substrate we're using? What is the nutrient mix that we're using? So all of these things that we put into helping to develop the crop. And so we think about all those things, but you can tune the AI to focus more on, say, light or ventilation or things like the nutrition and irrigation and so on. And it really just depends. So there is a manual intervention the farmer can have based upon their experience and their intuition. And I should just say that the picture I showed you of the vertical farm with the 4 towers, the footprint of each one of those is 42 square meters, and they will produce 20 tons of crop per annum for each tower. And the farm gate cost of Basil from one of our towers, including depreciation, is just under £3 sterling. The wholesale market price for the equivalent of organic in London is £28.
And in your presentation there, David, you talked about an 18-hour growing day. Again, perhaps a silly question, it's maybe more to do with the biology of it, but why not a 24-hour growing day? You know, like, why have any darkness at all?
Yeah, the crop scientists are telling us it'll knacker the plants out. So we've run experiments like that, and it looks like there are some really interesting things. It looks like 18 hours is on average optimal. The crops actually do need to rest. We've done things like applied pure green light, and green light tends to bounce off the plants and stress them a bit. And when we applied green light to a basil plant, all the canopy turned 30 degrees to the left. We switched the green light off and it went back to its original position. So what the hell is going on there? I have absolutely no idea, but these are the kind of experiments you know, that you can run. And the other thing is that there's a particular enzyme that's in every plant which is designed to prevent it getting stressed by sudden changes in light levels. So like a bright sunny day, a cloud goes over the sun, and then it's bright sunny again. And that is a sort of almost like an internal sunscreen to protect the plant. But that uses up between 3 and 5% of all the energy the plant needs to grow. So if you're now in charge of the weather, you're never going to have that event happen. So you can actually breed that enzyme out or switch it off using epigenetics, not GM, but just remove it, and then you only need between 95 and 97% of the energy that you used to need. If you can find 3 or 4 more of those types of things by working with crop science, you're going to reduce your energy bill even more.
John Paul, there's an interesting question come through there on the chat. When you talk about using peat as the basis, is there an issue around there with sustainability, given, you know, everything that's going on with board ammonia and peat extraction just in general in Ireland? Oh, sorry, John Paul, you're on mute there.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's certainly, you know, areas where, you know, where things could be improved. So yeah, that would be a consideration for sure. And
just the other one there, and maybe some other farmers are thinking where they could potentially put this in their sheds, and as they're listening this evening, just I have a number of farm buildings ideal for a vertical farming solution, but significant capital investment is needed to bring them up to standard with flooring and roofing. And is there any assistance in Northern Ireland to assist with this investment? And does Farmony's package include the cost of the technology?
Yeah, so the overall, so this particular solution is what we started out with, which is the containerized solution, you know, which I said is running in like, you know, 75 to 80 thousand sterling. And that's like your, as I said, that's your solution. You know, you need a water supply and an electrical connection, and then this would land in your backyard. We just were taken a bit when we realized that infrastructure in terms of mushroom houses that is throughout the country. And then we worked with one of the companies up in Tyrone, you know, as regards like basically them working with us and provide, and, you know, building on site the mushroom houses, which we thought was a really ideal solution, and that would cut the cost again. So that's certainly worth a consideration.
Yeah, and a question there, I suppose, for either David or John Paul, just can seedlings be grown under a vertical farming manner and then be transplanted outdoors in a conventional system? I'm sure probably could, but maybe it's not economic, is it? Or
yeah, so that's what we're doing. That's why we grew seed potatoes. We did 3 varieties for a cooperative in the northeast of Scotland. We have done 4 varieties of strawberries for big strawberry growers under poly and glass in Scotland and in England. And we're doing blueberries as well now on the same basis. And as I say, the brassicas we grew for a 17 farm cooperative in the east of Scotland. And so, yeah, I mean, and they're then hardened off to go out into open fields.
And a question just there, an issue in the Northern Ireland, because it's so livestock based, is ammonia emissions. Am I right in saying that there's no ammonia from growing plants in these sort of systems? Like zero, when you say zero emissions, I assume that's carbon, but is there any ammonia too or anything like that coming off them?
We don't vent anything. There is no venting at all from the farm.
Right. Folks, we're getting close here to the end of a few more questions just in this other window. Yes, you can all see that John Paul's actually, good man, you're answering away at them. That's grand. Listen, folks, we're approaching the end. It's nearly up to 8:30. If anyone else has questions they want to send through or they think afterwards, we would be happy enough to send them on to John Paul and David, and we can get back. And Heather Stewart, the NIIAS Secretary, has this webinar recorded, so it'll be going up on the NIIAS website in a few days' time when we get it clipped and edited. So just at this point, really, we are at 8:30. Like I will wrap it up. Just I'd like to thank John Paul for a good presentation, literally live from a very vertical farm, so we can see exactly what's going on. And to David, the detail in that presentation was unbelievable, and it was put across even for myself, who knows literally nothing about horticulture or this sort of technology, in a very easy to understand manner. So thanks very much to both our speakers, and thanks to Heather for arranging this webinar this evening too. Folks, again, so any questions, you can send it through to secretary@niias.co.uk and we'll get back to you. And we'll also send out a link to the recording whenever it's available. We'll be in touch, hopefully, with other events. And as I said at the beginning, as far as our March conference, we'll hopefully get that rescheduled at some point in the near future. And if not, we'll go online in a socially distanced manner. So thanks very much, everyone, for tuning in. And thanks to our two speakers again.
Brilliant, pleasure. Thanks for inviting.
You're very welcome.